The Stone Zone, with legendary Republican strategist and political icon and pundit Roger Stone. Stone has served as a senior campaign aide to 3 Republican presidents. He is a New York Times best-selling author and a longtime friend and advisor of President Donald Trump. As an outspoken libertarian, Stone has appeared on thousands of broadcasts, spoken at countless venues, and lectured before the prestigious Oxford Political Union and the Cambridge Union Society. Due to his 4+ decades in the political and cultural arena, Stone has become a pop culture icon. And now, here's your host, Roger Stone.
Welcome, I'm Roger Stone, and yes, you are back in the Stone Zone. Yesterday, January 6th, a momentous day for several reasons. Yes, Vice President Kamala Harris played the ceremonial role of certifying the election of President Donald Trump. Now, it is very important to understand that while the media used January 6th as an opportunity to recycle all of their false narratives about the January 6th activities after the last election, that the role of Kamala Harris is largely ministerial, particularly after Democrats revised the law that pertained to the vice president's role in certifying the election. See, they argued in 2020 that the vice president, then Mike Pence, a man who chose to end his political career, really had no discretion, that his role was ministerial. Actually, then the number of constitutional lawyers tell me that he did have some discretion to delay or send results back to the states for review. Since that time, the law has been revised to make the role of the vice president in the certification of the election largely ceremonial. Now, interestingly enough, to her credit, Kamala Harris did not have to show up. Although Vice President Richard Nixon presided over the Senate to certify the election of his arch-rival John F. Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey, who was vice president in 1968, elected not to participate, in which case the responsibility fell to the president pro tem of the U.S. Senate. Anyway, that little piece of political trivia for your consideration. Sadly, however, the media did use January 6th to try to prop up their crumbling narrative about January 6th. For anyone who doesn't believe that January 6th was a setup and a Fedsurrection, I commend to you the journalism at revolver.news by Dr. Darren Beatty, who I think has done an extraordinary job of destroying that narrative. But here, very disturbingly, is Attorney General Merrick Garland telling yet another lie about January 6th.
You've seen some of that video. What's your reaction to that?
So I don't want to comment on any particular reports. I think all Americans saw what happened on January 6th, and most of us saw it as it was happening. It was a violent attack on a fundamental tenet of American democracy, that power is peacefully transferred from one administration to another. Over 100 officers were assaulted on that day. 5 officers died. We have charged more than 1,000 people with their crimes on that day, and more than 500 have already been convicted. I think it's very clear what happened on January 6th.
I mean, that is, of course, an egregious lie. 5 officers did not die on January 6th. The only 2 people who died on January 6th that I'm aware of are of course, Ashley Babbitt, a decorated Air Force veteran who was unarmed, who was menacing no one, a threat to no one, shot and killed in cold blood without any warning. We have to hope that the Trump Justice Department will bring Officer Michael Byrd in front of a grand jury, along with other witnesses, to determine exactly what happened there. But I think we already know. Then there is, of course, the bludgeoning to death of Roseanne Boyland, the other egregious murder on that day. Will the people responsible for these two cold-blooded murders be held responsible? Well, it remains to be seen, but hope springs eternal. It is amazing that they continue this false narrative. There was one officer, Officer Liebengood, who died the next day of a stroke. And then subsequently, five officers committed suicide after the January 6th events. What caused them to do so? Well, an interesting question for another day. I do want to do one housekeeping thing here. We spoke yesterday about my 16th annual International Men and Women's Best Dressed list. This is a labor of love, something I've been doing since 2008. New Year's Day for 16 years, I have picked up the tradition of the late Mr. Blackwell. He was a Hollywood syndicated columnist and a designer who would compile this very interesting list of the best and dressed women and men in the world. And it included titans of industry, actors, actresses, athletes, and other prominent Americans. When he died in 2008, I decided to pick up this tradition. Now, when my friends over at the Gateway Pundit, and I'm grateful for this, reposted the list on their site, somehow they left off one of the worst dressed people in the world. That would be Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. My objection here is really quite simple. When Mr. Zelenskyy, who we have given billions and billions of dollars to as U.S. taxpayers, addressed a joint session of Congress, he wore a dirty sweatshirt and fatigues. When he went to visit or to meet with President-elect Donald Trump at the dedication of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, he was similarly dressed. Yet when he spoke to the World Economic Forum and he bowed down to Klaus Schwab, he wore a jacket and tie. It's disrespectful to the American people to address a joint session of Congress dressed that way. I understand that this is a costume because he's really an actor hired by oligarchs to play the role of the president of Ukraine. And maybe he's emanating the late Fidel Castro, who wore his fatigues as part of a costume to cultivate his image as a modern day Robin Hood, when in fact he was an authoritarian thug. But when the Gateway Pundit reposted my worst dressed segment, they, I think for space, left Zelenskyy out. He is without any question one of the worst dressed people on the face of the planet. Joining me now to help break down the political events of the day, the editor-in-chief of the Illinois Review and my colleague, Mark Vargas. Welcome to the Zone, Mark.
Honored to be with you, Roger. Thank you.
So a historic day yesterday. It seems to me that Comrade Jamie Raskin, the communist congressman from Maryland, who laid out in great detail his intention to thwart the election and the certification of the election of Donald Trump, claiming falsely that the grounds to do so was Trump's violation of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, claiming that Trump had participated in an insurrection, a claim that no federal court has found. In fact, Trump has never been charged anywhere with that crime. There's a number of egregious and fake charges against him, but that was not one of them. And then, of course, last Saturday, there were supposed to be 1 million people in Washington, D.C. to object to Trump's election. That turned out to be about 15 people carrying signs outside the Capitol. So is the opposition to Donald Trump fizzling among the people, or does the deep state have something else in mind for us?
No, I think the deep state and the mainstream media, or legacy media, as we like to call it, it is dead on arrival. It's a reason why CNN and MSNBC are hemorrhaging viewers. It's why they're hemorrhaging money, why they're having to reduce the salaries of some of their biggest talking heads. But you're right, this small little group looked like a Joe Biden rally of 15 or so people that had gathered. But Roger, this is what happens when Democrats know that an incoming administration is going to restore law and order in America. What's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And I think that's a very big reason why we saw a peaceful day yesterday on January 6th to certify the elections, because President Trump isn't holding back any punches. He's going to go after wrongs, and he's going to restore law and order in America. And as a result of that, we saw a very peaceful day on Capitol, something quite different that we saw 4 years ago with a incompetent and incontinent Joe Biden, who had campaigned on opening our borders and allowing everyone, including the most dangerous and violent criminals, to enter our country, no questions asked. Well, again, that stops on January 20th.
Yeah, it was interesting to see Hakeem Jeffries, who is, I think, the titular minority leader of the House, with Nancy Pelosi very much still pulling the strings, bragging about the fact that Democrats didn't challenge the certification of Trump's election, ignoring the fact that Democrats have objected formally to every election of a Republican president since 1988. But dime store Obama, as they call Hakeem Jeffries, seems to think that we've memory holed all of that. We could play that long video here today. We played it a number of times. Democrats have always challenged the election results. They didn't do so yesterday because Donald Trump's election was so sweeping. They don't have a leg to stand on.
No, you're right, Roger. And I mean, look at the support that President Trump received in the Black community across the country, in some of these major deep blue cities like Chicago and New York, and in places like New Jersey and Atlanta. I mean, it was remarkable. Look at the support that President Trump has received from the Democrats' base, not only Black, but Latino voters as well. And so it doesn't behoove them to challenge the election results and their certification when in fact they're hemorrhaging support from their most critical and essential base of their party. Because why? Americans, everyday hardworking Americans, are struggling. Gas prices, grocery prices are way too high, and it would be a bad look for the Democrats to oppose an incoming administration that wants to do nothing but make America safe again, make America great again, and make America wealthy again.
Mark, I've been focused on the actions of the Biden administration on their way out the door. Among other things, they're shipping as much money as they possibly can to Ukraine in fear that Donald Trump is going to settle that conflict and end this flow of cash to Ukraine. Also, Joe Biden now giving out medals to people who I suspect don't deserve them. Yesterday, we spoke on this show about George Soros, a man who said that the greatest time of his life was when he collaborated with the Nazis to help them round up Jews in his native Hungary. For those who say that he never said that, well, he said it on 60 Minutes. It's there for all to see. We played it yesterday. Also, the Medal of Freedom for Hillary Clinton. You remember her. She's the one who erased 33 million email records that had come through her illegal server using a hammer and beach blit. Now, she objects, saying she didn't do it. Well, that's because she gave the order to some flunky who did it for her. But for that, and maybe for toppling the regime in Libya, which had provided one of the most stable qualities of life to its citizens under Gaddafi. Gaddafi, who had realigned himself with the West, who had paid out those killed in the Lockerbie bombing, who was helping our country with intelligence regarding radical Islam in the region. Anybody who looks at what's going on today in Libya, particularly the open air slave markets in which Black people are being sold into slavery, another one of Hillary Clinton's great accomplishments. That she has avoided prison remains shocking to me. That anyone with a straight face can say that she deserves the highest medal, the highest honor that the American president can bestow to a civilian, the Medal of Freedom, really kind of boggles the mind.
Well, not only does it boggle the mind, but it tells an interesting story when you look at the bookends of some of the very controversial pardons and commutations that Biden has made in the last month, including the full pardon of his son, backdating it all the way to 2014, and then these high civilian medals that he is awarding to Hillary Clinton and to George Soros and to so many others. It really is a head scratcher. But Roger, when you look at him on stage handing out these medals, I mean, Joe Biden is not there. He looks dazed, confused. He really looks out of it. And so it begs the question, Joe Biden clearly isn't running the country, then who is? And I think every one of your listeners can name the two people that are running this country, and that's Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi. But again, both the pardons, commutations, and the awards of the highest civilian medals in the country really tell you where the heart and soul and priorities of the Democratic Party are.
Very, very well put. Mark, just as a savvy observer of what happens in Washington and American politics, what do you make of these bizarre pardons by Joe Biden? In other words, he's pardoning people on death row. He's pardoning people who have been convicted of just vicious crimes like murder. He's pardoning people who have offered no contrition. He's pardoning people in cases where there are no extenuating circumstances that would indicate that a pardon is deserved. It seems to be completely ideological. In other words, take killers and worse, terrorists and those on death row and just release them. What could possibly be his thinking here?
You know, it's a really good question. And it's the same question as to why he's allowed this open borders policy over the last 4 years, where over 500,000 children are missing. Think about that. 500,000 children are missing. Where are they? There's no doubt human trafficking, the sex trade, they're being abused, they're being raped, just like young women and girls. And to allow a policy of the most violent and dangerous criminals on the planet, including members of terrorist cells and organizations, to just freely walk into our country. So the same policies, the same mentality that allows that to happen on our southern border is the same mentality. Why not just let the country's most violent and dangerous and vile inmates, like rapists and murderers and child abusers, why not just let them walk freely out of jail or walk freely out of death row and back into a traditional prison? Again, this is why you have so many members of the Democratic Party that are coming out publicly and saying, I don't recognize my party anymore. It's another reason why the Black and brown community voted in such unison and voted so strongly in support of President Trump over Kamala Harris, because of these policies. Democrats cannot defend these policies that have put American lives in danger, not just here at home, but abroad.
Well, and we're just in the beginning of the pardon process. Before Joe leaves, I predict to you that he will pardon his brother Jim, other members of the Biden crime family. He may be attempted to pardon himself for specific crimes that he committed while he was vice president, crimes for which he would have no immunity under the recent Supreme Court decision. I suspect that you have pardons coming from Liz Cheney, who suborned perjury in the January 6th committee hearings, who destroyed evidence, who coached witnesses, who was in on the fabrication of videos and audios, who suppressed testimony from witnesses like Ray Epps. Why do we never hear from Ray Epps? I mean, I would have thought that he would have been someone you would call in the hearings. No, nothing from him. I also suspect that Comrade Raskin is seeking a pardon for himself. Adam Schiff says he doesn't want one, which means he desperately wants one. I suspect that all of those involved in the Russian collusion hoax, I'm speaking specifically of Islamic convert John Brennan, the man who contacted our English speaking allies, the so-called Five Eyes nations, and asked their intelligence services to monitor people like me and 25 other Trump associates. No rationale for that, by the way, no probable cause, just spying on American citizens with deniability. Have them do it so you can deny that you're doing it. The same John Brennan, who, by the way, signed the visas for 4 of the 9/11 hijackers to leave Rita and come to the United States. John Brennan is, of course, an admitted former communist, perhaps still a communist. He says he voted for the Communist Party candidate for president. You got to wonder how a man like this ever became CIA director to begin with. He is, I keep seeing these videos. I'm going to pull one for tomorrow of him complaining about how Trump is a threat to democracy when he himself is the greatest threat to democracy in American history. Now, John Brennan testified in the Senate and lied about the surveillance by the CIA of a Senate committee that was investigating his illegal use of torture. So he was using the intelligence agencies to spy on duly elected members of both parties in the U.S. Senate. And he lied about that under oath. But unlike me, he didn't get charged, even though no statement that I made hid any underlying crime. Therefore, no false or misstatement I made before Congress was material. It didn't matter because when you go to trial in the District of Columbia, the Constitution, the law, the rules, precedent, the evidence, the facts, the truth, these things are meaningless. But another example of someone who has escaped prosecution entirely. I'm not sure whether people are going to be held responsible. I mean, there is no statute of limitations, no limit in the time in which someone can be charged with treason. And my real concern is that were you to bring such prosecutions, and I'm not an attorney, this is a decision for grand juries and prosecutors who examine the facts, but if you were to go to trial in D.C., it's impossible to get a just verdict there. You will never get a free trial, meaning the trials are all politically motivated. The judges are harshly partisan, do not hide it. It's demonstrable from the bench. They will engage in a series of unconstitutional pretrial motions to limit anybody's defenses if you're a Republican, not so, of course, if you're a Democrat. And the makeup of the jury will be hostile. There'll be no balance whatsoever. Now, statistically, in the District of Columbia, where Joe Biden got 90+% of the vote, it would be numerically wrong, but not impossible for a jury to include at least one Republican. But looking at my own trial, not a single military veteran, not a single Roman Catholic, not a single evangelical Christian, but a disproportionate number of people who had worked for the Clinton or Obama administration, some of them in the Justice Department. I actually had a woman on the jury in my case who had been a law school classmate of one of the prosecutors. Judge had no problem whatsoever with that. So the whole question of whether Pam Bondi, who I think is an excellent choice to be Attorney General, and Kash Patel, who will be a breath of fresh air to bring real reform to the FBI, will be able, using the District of Columbia court system, to bring anybody to justice. Well, that's an open question. I want to get Jeff Clark, former Associate Attorney General under Donald Trump's administration, on the show to ask about that soon. Because I'm not certain how this can be addressed. One law that I would like to see passed is if you are charged with a federal crime, you should be tried in the jurisdiction in which you live, not the jurisdiction from which the indictment emanates. That'd be one easy way to make sure that at least you had a fairer shot at a fair trial. All right, Mark, you have a guest you want to bring with us. We pride ourselves here on the Stone Zone of bringing in guests that aren't appearing everywhere and you can't see everywhere with unique points of view. Let's bring your guest onto the air.
Roger, it's a pleasure for me to welcome a John Kennedy, or a Robert Kennedy Democrat. He is the former CEO of the Chicago Public School District and the former Chicago mayor candidate and a school choice advocate, Paul Vallas. Paul, welcome to the Stone Zone. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Roger. Good to meet you.
Paul, we have so many mutual friends who speak very, very highly of you.
Thank you.
I was disappointed to see that you were not elected mayor. It led me to conclude that the people of Chicago have lost their minds. And then I saw your mayor, who I gather has had some real problems with stress, been hospitalized. I'm not sure he's up to the job at all, but he made it very clear that the soaring crime rates in the city of Chicago, these are all the fault of Richard Nixon, who hasn't been president for more than 50 years.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, Richard Nixon, the man who desegregated the public schools, Richard Nixon, who gave us affirmative action, Richard Nixon, who formed the Office of Minority Business Enterprise to make low interest loans available to African-American entrepreneurs. Richard Nixon, who cobbled together the votes to pass the 1958 Civil Rights Act when Lyndon Johnson was playing a backdoor role with the Southern Caucus trying to block civil rights. Richard Nixon, who quadrupled the funding for Black colleges. Richard Nixon, who tripled the funding for civil rights enforcement in his Justice Department. That Richard Nixon. Anyway, had to vent about that.
Well, that's okay. It's a good venting. Let me point out that if you look at the national crime rate across the country, that the violent crimes significantly jumped in 2019 around the time of the COVID closures, and particularly in blue states. It was really fueled by the increase in youth crime. Like, for example, in Chicago, there was a 50% increase in the number of school-age youth 17 years and younger who were murdered, and a dramatic increase in the number of murders and other violent crimes committed by school-age youth. I think the Chicago Crime Lab pointed out that something like 98% of the kids who were murdered and those who were arrested for murder were not in school. So, when the national teachers unions, led by people like Stacey Davis Gates in Chicago and Randy Weingart in New York, when they shut down schools in Chicago, for example, for 78 consecutive weeks, and flooded the streets in Chicago with over 300,000 kids, those kids became victims, and at the same time, they became criminals also. So the fuel in crime was the direct result of the, I believe, that we still have not recovered from, because the Chicago Public Schools lost 38,000 students during the COVID shutdowns, and most of those students did not return to school. They're now on the street. Many of those former students are committing crimes. So I really put a lot of the blame for the spike in crime across the country on the national teachers unions. And of course, the mayor was the chief lobbyist for the teachers union. And obviously, the teachers union pretty much underwrote his campaign. So at the end of the day, you want to know why crime spiked post 2019? The national teachers unions defying of the science and shutting schools down with catastrophic consequences, not only academically, but in terms of public safety.
I have many friends in Chicago and in the Chicago area who tell me that crime is now not just a problem in the inner city, but the crime problem is spreading to the suburbs and to the outer residential communities, that this is an epidemic. Now, through my whole life, Chicago was always known as the city that worked. I mean, under Mayor Richard J. Daley Sr., Chicago was known as a city that worked. Even under his son, Richie Daley, Chicago was known as a city that worked. Are the demographic changes in Chicago making it impossible to return the city to safety?
Look, I just think it all boils down to leadership. I went from like 4% in the polls to 48.5%. So I lost. If 15,000 people would have voted differently, I would have gotten elected mayor. And obviously, my priorities were school choice, public safety, and at the same time, transforming budgets not into vehicles that expand government, but vehicles that invest in communities. J.B. Pritzker, obviously a big fan of yours and the president, when he talks about the growth of employment in Illinois, really since COVID, it's been predominantly government growth driven. I mean, in other words, the state that's been losing population for the better part of 2 decades, that's been reversed because of the huge influx of migrants. And of course, much of the growth the last few years post-COVID have been the result of governmental spending and the expansion of governmental employees, not natural growth from economic growth. So clearly, I mean, it's a leadership problem. And the fundamental problem that you have in Illinois is that Illinois is the most gerrymandered state in the country. You've never seen a legislative map, until you've seen the Illinois map. In fact, Leonardo da Vinci's portrait of the anatomy was more coterminous than some of these legislative districts. And it literally guarantees an almost veto-proof Democratic majority in both the House and Senate. And so even if you have a Republican governor, that governor can be stifled. And it's a one-party state. And so there's really no real competition. There's no check and balance. I mean, Trump got 45% of the vote in Illinois. And I don't think the Republicans picked up a single seat in either the House or the Senate, certainly not at the congressional level, because the maps have been drawn in such a way as to really deny people a working democracy. And so it's a leadership problem. It's not a demographic problem. And Trump did significantly better with both the Black and Latino community, as Mark will point out, than he did in the past. And he's polling a lot better than he ever did. But it doesn't matter. The maps are really structured in such a way as to literally guarantee one-party rule.
Focusing only on the presidential race in Illinois, 45% is quite extraordinary when you consider that Illinois was not a targeted state by the Trump campaign. They spent virtually no money there at all.
That's right.
Such activities that did happen in Illinois, there's a lot of indigenous grassroots activity by local Trump supporters. But it's an extraordinarily strong showing, considering that it was not a targeted state. 6 more points, and there is hope for Chicago. It's amazing to me because I grew up in Connecticut outside of New York City, and I've seen the deterioration of New York City, which under Mayor Giuliani, and yes, even under Mayor Bloomberg, was a relatively safe and functioning city. Both Bloomberg and Giuliani brought taxes down, which was a boon to new job creation, to business creation. One of the most damaging policies in New York State has been their bail reform, which is to say no bail, meaning dangerous criminals are arrested, they're charged, they're required to put up no bail, and they're released back out on the street. And an overwhelming number of them are committing crimes again. You would think that J.B. Pritzker and the Illinois Democrats would recognize this trend, but instead of going the other way, they're bringing the same essentially no bail policies to your state. Mark, your thoughts? Or
Yeah,
either one of you?
well, I was going to say
Oh,
you're
the fundamental.
right.
Go ahead, Mark. I'll let you. I'll follow you.
No, I'm just going to say, Roger, you're absolutely right. And this is one of the things that Paul campaigned on was how do we restore law and order? And not only has he talked about that, but I think it's important, and Paul has outlined as well, things that President Trump can do, because clearly Illinois leaders like Governor J.B. Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, clearly they're not have the ability nor the desire to make Chicago and Illinois a safer community, a safer state and city. But there are things that President Trump can do on day one as the 47th president of the United States to send a clear message to Illinoisans that a new sheriff's in town, and we're here collectively to make Chicago a safer and Illinois a safer state. Paul, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Roger. First of all, before I comment on that, Roger, let me respond to your question about pretrial release. Look, there's nothing wrong with bail reform, and there's nothing wrong with eliminating the ability to post bail when it comes to criminal justice. The problem with the bail reform or even the no bail legislation is the failure to distinguish between violent and habitual criminals when it comes to not providing bail. In fact, long before the Safety Act eliminated bail altogether, the State Safety Act, as they call it, the so-called Safety Act, they had engaged in pretrial release where 3/4 of the violent felons who were being arrested were being sent home. They were being put on ankle bracelets, etc. And of course, those who were charged. So the bottom line here is the problem is the failure to distinguish between violent criminals and habitual criminals. In Chicago, for example, since 2020, there's been almost 400 individuals who have been arrested for murder or attempted murder who were out on felony bail. This is even before the elimination of bail altogether. In other words, they have been released and they were on the street and they went out and they committed murder or attempted murder. And incidentally, given the abysmal arrest rate that you're seeing in a city like Chicago, where only maybe 1 in 5 murderers are arrested and actually prosecuted, and maybe 5% of the shooters, that 400 number is probably 5 times that size. So that's the fundamental problem, just the failure to provide guardrails. So if you're going to reform the criminal justice system, you have to distinguish between the individuals who are serious criminals and habitual criminals. And that's been the failure to do. With regards to where I think that there's a role for the Trump administration to play, not only on public safety, but also on education, is first of all not to take the debate, because I think Pritzker and Stacey Davis Gates, Chicago Teachers Unions, and Johnson, I mean, they're still running against Trump. They still think that, right now the teachers union, for example, is trying to force the city to give them a massive contract that would cost the city, well, by the estimates of their original proposal, $10 billion. This is a school district that already spends $30,000 per kid. So of course it's all about Trump. Trump's coming in, the sky's falling down. There's going to be a disaster after Trump gets elected and things like that. I think my advice is for them not to take the debate and really focus on where they can actually make a difference in Illinois. And I truly believe that on the public safety side, I think there's a need for the Justice Department to investigate the public safety system in not only state of Illinois, but specifically in Cook County, where they're lying about the data. They're not releasing the data. Something like 3/4 of those who get arrested under the no bail rule, don't even show up for court. They send them out postcards, so they count the postcards being sent out as them being in compliance with their court requirement, and they're not enforcing something like 3/4 of the orders of protection. There's been an epidemic of domestic violence, and they're just deliberately withholding information. And of course, between the pretrial release program and the withholding of information, and the fact that fortunately we have a new state's attorney in Cook County who's a real prosecutor. But prior to that, just the refusal to charge people who are arrested for serious offenses. I think there's been a fundamental breakdown of public safety. And there's a criminal industrial complex that exists in this country today. They're the lawyers who sue the city and who are hired by the city to settle lawsuits. They're the they're the consent decree monitors. The monitor of the consent decree over the Chicago Police Department has billed the city something like for $19 million over the last 3 to 4 years during the life of the consent decree. They're the researchers at the universities who manipulate the data. They're those, and they're the so-called, defund the police advocates who believe that effective policing can be substituted with social programs. I mean, there's a group out there, and they make money off decriminalization. They take money off pretrial release. They're generating a lot of income, advancing agendas that in effect are undermining public safety. So, I think it's well worth the Justice Department coming in and investigating what's going on in Chicago, looking at the data in a very transparent way. I think there's a role for the Justice Department to play.
Mark, your thoughts before we let our guests go for the day.
Well, we're just seeing crime not get any better, but it gets worse. And Roger, I'll leave it with this: is think about this living in a city where in 2023, 220,000 high priority 911 calls went unanswered, like shots fired, assault in progress. Why? At the same time, the city's trying to pull money from the Chicago Police Department budget. At the same time that we've got a massive vacancy problem, we have crime skyrocketing and not enough officers on the street to do their jobs and to protect people and the community. And this just really sums up the Democratic policies regarding lawlessness. And it's another reason why President Trump, his mandate was so significant in November. Americans are tired of this. They want law and order restored back, not only in their cities, but in our country.
All right. We're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank Paul Vallas for joining us today. Paul, I have a feeling your greatest public service lies ahead. I hope you will consider running again, if not for mayor, for some office, because, well, you're one of the common sense Democrats that seem to be moving more towards President Trump these days. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but we have so many mutual friends who admire you so much.
Thank you.
Principled stand that you took in your own campaign. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Mark, we got about 14 minutes left to continue delving into domestic politics. What do you got?
Roger, Illinois Review broke a story late on Sunday, and this is where you have sort of the never Trumper rhino wing. But we put out a story that has Illinois Republicans going nuts, and that is that the Illinois House Republican leader, Tony McCombie, sided with the Democrats in 2023 and voted for a bill that expands healthcare coverage for transgender and non-binary individuals. We did a follow-up story to ask the question why, and yesterday we published a story that answered the why, and that is because around that exact same time that she abandoned her own Republican caucus, where 98% of her own Republican caucus in the House of Representatives voted against this measure, she voted for it. Why? At the same time that she was supporting this bill, she received $47,500 in campaign donations from the Illinois Hospital and Healthcare Association, who at that exact same time was pushing and lobbying to expand patient rights for transgender and non-binary individuals. And so it's a remarkable story. And her response, Roger, her response initially was to deny that that vote ever took place, and then to say that only, and what's interesting is that this bill, Roger, and you're going to find this as a head scratcher, she voted for it to allow men to have pap smears and women to have prostate exams. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. And though she tried to defend and say, well, only women can have pap smears, well, why did you vote for a bill that changed the language to allow all individuals to have that can have pap smears and prostate exams? And so her messaging strategy has been all over the map. It was to deny, and then now to saddle up and to dig in her heels, but really has the conservative grassroots, Trump Republicans in a total frenzy here in Illinois, and she's in big trouble.
Another great story for the Illinois Review. Folks, I urge you to check out the Illinois Review. Where can people go to do that, Mark?
You can go to illinoisreview.com. You could also follow us on X and on Facebook.
All right, very good. Well, let's continue with the news of the day. What else do you have on the docket?
Roger, what's interesting is new incoming Senate Majority Leader John Thune said several days ago that he would not have committee assignments assigned to Adam Schiff until he was investigated for the Russia collusion. But we just learned that Adam Schiff went on X and talked about his committee assignments. And so I think there's a lost in translation here where you have the Republican Senate Majority Leader saying, I won't assign him any committees until he's investigated. And several days later, Schiff is out here talking about, here are my Senate committee assignments. Roger, this just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's very interesting because this comes on the heels of an Inspector General's report from the Biden Justice Department, which says that Congressman Adam Schiff and his colleague, Congressman Eric Swalwell, both leaked classified documents to the news media to bolster their false Russian collusion hoax, and that the FBI was aware of that. Now, I can't think of any reason why they should not be prosecuted for that. There's no congressional immunity for leaking classified documents. It's a perfect example of what I think Senator Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, was talking about. Adam Schiff remains the single most corrupt member of Congress, in my view. You will recall that he said that he had seen more than circumstantial evidence of Russian collusion with the Trump campaign, yet millions of dollars later, he produced no such thing. When he's pressed about this, he recycles the same lie, that a high-level Trump campaign official was sharing polling information with a Russian intelligence asset. That's what they have. That's a lie. The high-level official he refers to is Paul Manafort. At the time that this accusation, supposedly this transaction took place, pollster Tony Fabrizio of the Trump campaign said there was no proprietary polling information. The campaign had not yet taken general election polls. So any information that Paul Manafort may have given to the man he is accused of passing it to, Konstantin Kilimnik, would have been public information, things you could have found on the internet. And then lastly, Konstantin Kilimnik is not a Russian intelligence asset. He's an American intelligence asset. The independent journalist Matt Taibbi has absolutely proven that. And you can see found in a Freedom of Information Act request, the cables from our embassy in Kyiv back to the State Department, including information supplied by U.S. intelligence asset Kalimnik, in which his name was initially redacted. So there is no Russian collusion. The idea that the Russians offered to help Trump and Trump took them up on that is yet another one of Pencil Neck's egregious lies. Will he be held responsible for his lies? The Senate majority should hold Senator Thune's feet to the fire, and this man should get no committees. And frankly, it's time for him to be in front of a grand jury. There's more than enough evidence to bring him there. We have to hope that once she is confirmed, that the new Attorney General, Pam Bondi, will move in this direction. By the way, no, Mark, it's not revenge and it's not retribution. It's equal protection. It's one standard, not a two-tier justice system in which, for example, General James Clapper can testify under oath that there's no metadata collection program on Americans. Doesn't exist, except for Edward Snowden proved that he was lying. Now he's at Vermont College teaching ethics and getting a fat paycheck from the folks over at CNN. Given their ratings, I'm kind of surprised they can afford him. But this kind of two-tier justice system really, really must end. And until we wrap our heads around the problem with the federal courts in DC, which cannot be counted on for justice, I'm not certain how that's going to work. Again, I'm going to try to get Jeff Clark to join the show to talk about that issue and others. Last night, I had the privilege of speaking to the Vero Beach, Florida Republicans, and they're just as excited as I am about this new golden era that we're about to enter. Let's call it the era of Trump. This will be an unprecedented era of peace, prosperity, security, justice, and yes, law and order. We got a few more minutes here, and I have to get your take on this. Greenland being joined to the United States, our ambassador there back in the Nixon's days it wasn't an ambassador, he's actually a consul general because Greenland is a protectorate and owned by Denmark. It is an island in essence, rich with natural resources. And contrary to what I expected, there seems to be some excitement in Greenland about the possibility of leaving being a colony of Denmark and joining the United States. Now I read that my friend Donald Trump Jr. is visiting there. I kind of wonder what that's about. Maybe there's some serious talks going on. I certainly hope so. But Mark, your take on the possibility of Greenland becoming part of the United States?
Well, this is getting even more real, Roger, after this morning, Trump Force One landing in Greenland and disembarking from the plane is Charlie Kirk, Sergio Gore, the incoming director of White House personnel, and Donald Trump Jr. there in Greenland. And I believe we have a quick clip of Donald Trump Jr. there this morning in Greenland. Let's see if we can play that.
Guys, we're here in Nuuk, Greenland. The founder, 1721. That yellow house with the red top, that was his original spot. That's where he moved. This is where it all started out here. Just incredible scenery. Super cool stuff.
Yeah, this is looking realer and realer. I think it shows you Donald Trump's ability to think outside the box. Gives you a perfect example of his big picture thinking. Plus, I think he's been very gracious to the Canadians. I mean, they have big problems if they want to become a state. I don't think they'd actually elect Justin Trudeau as governor. I suspect that he'd be defeated. But if they want to become part of the United States, they might be much, much better off. The authoritarian rule of Justin Trudeau who I do believe is the illegitimate son of Fidel Castro, seems to be coming to an end. And it looks to me like Canada, like the United States, is going to be saved by common sense. We're excited about both of these things. Mark, do you intend to go to the presidential inaugural in Washington, D.C.?
I do intend on going to the inaugural, and I won't be alone. I know you'll be there, Roger, and probably and I'm hearing it. They're estimating over 1 million people will gather around the mall to watch President Trump take the oath of office. I can guarantee you that this inauguration on January 20th will be larger, much larger than Barack Obama's inauguration in 2008. I've spoken to a couple of officials in Washington, and they have assured me that based on the information and numbers and the chatter that they're hearing now, this will be a significantly larger inauguration.
Well, let me say this. My own granddaughter was assaulted by an Antifa protester in 2017 when we went to the inauguration, assaulted on her way to the inaugural ball in a ball gown. Therefore, what I'm praying for is peace, a peaceful transfer of power, but also peace in the streets. As you know, John Kennedy said that Washington, D.C. was a town of northern charm and southern efficiency. I question whether the infrastructure in terms of transportation, restaurants, and so on, hotels, can accommodate an influx of 1 million people. But we pray for the safety of everybody who chooses to go. And above all, as we always do here on the Stone Zone, we pray for the safety of our president, Donald Trump, and his family. I want to thank my co-host today, Mark Vargas of the Illinois Review. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. And until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
The Stone Zone,